Taeho Kim stood in the white observation room, staring at the holographic display of planet Vergos 7. The planet looked angry. Purple clouds swirled across continents covered in dark forests. Red lightning flashed through the atmosphere every few seconds. The data scrolling beside the image made his stomach tight. Toxic air, acid rain, predators with venom that could melt steel, temperature swings from freezing to boiling within hours. "You can still back out," Una Park said from behind him. She was his handler, assigned by Earth Command to monitor his progress. Her voice was kind, but worried. "Nobody would blame you. This is a Class 9 death world. The survival rate for first-time participants is 38%. Taeho shook his head. He was 28 years old, a xenobiologist who studied alien life forms. He had spent his whole life preparing for this moment, even if he didn't know it at the time. Growing up in the mountains of rural Korea with his grandfather had taught him things that most modern humans had forgotten. How to start fires without matches, how to find water, how to read the land and understand what it was trying to tell you. "I'm going," he said quietly. "Earth needs this." The Galactic Council had invited Earth to participate in the survival exam for the first time. It was a test that advanced species took to prove they were ready for colonization rights in deep space. 47 species were competing this year. Earth was the newest member, the weakest by far. Most aliens saw humans as fragile creatures who had barely left their own solar system. Una sighed and handed him a small device. "This is your emergency beacon. If things go bad, press it. We'll extract you within minutes. But remember, if you use it before the 30 days are up, Earth fails the exam. We won't get another chance for 50 years. Taeho clipped the beacon to his belt. He wore simple clothing, designed to handle extreme conditions. His only other equipment was a survival knife, a water purifier, and a small data pad with information about Vergos 7's known species. The Council didn't allow advanced technology. The exam was about raw survival ability, not gadgets. The transport ship took him to the orbital station above Vergos 7. The station was massive, filled with alien species from across the galaxy. Taeho walked through the preparation area, feeling eyes on him. Aliens of every shape and size stared at him. Some whispered. Others laughed. A group of Ralkari warriors stood near the deployment bay. They were insectoid creatures, each one over 7 feet tall with 4 arms and chitinous armor that looked like it could stop bullets. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Kazet, clicked his mandibles in amusement when he saw Taeho. "The human," Kazet said in the common galactic language. His translator device made his words understandable. "Look at it. Soft skin, weak muscles, only 2 arms. Your species will not last 3 days down there, soft thing." The other Ralkari warriors buzzed with laughter. They were famous across the galaxy as fearless fighters. Their homeworld was almost as dangerous as Vergos 7, and they trained from birth in military discipline. Taeho said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with people who already decided what they thought about you was a waste of energy. Near the windows, a group of Kelon intellectuals floated in their environmental suits. They were amphibious beings who looked like walking octopi, brilliant scientists and engineers. One of them, whose name translator showed as Bellowing Tide, spoke to his companions loud enough for Taeho to hear. "I calculate the human has a 12% chance of surviving the first week," Bellowing Tide said, his tentacles gesturing at a holographic screen showing betting odds. "Most predators on Vergos 7 hunt by detecting electromagnetic signatures. Humans produce strong bioelectric fields. They will be priority targets." Another Quelon agreed. "Their species has no natural defenses, no venom, no armor, no enhanced senses. Bringing them to this exam seems cruel. Perhaps the Council made a mistake." Taeho ignored them too. He moved to his deployment pod and climbed inside. The pod was small, barely large enough for him to sit. Through the transparent door, he could see dozens of other pods being loaded with contestants. Each species would be dropped in different locations across Vergas 7. The goal was simple: survive for 30 days. Yuna's face appeared on the small screen inside his pod. Taiho, I'll be monitoring your vital signs from orbit. I can communicate with you once per day for 5 minutes. Use that time wisely. Good luck. He nodded. I'll be fine. Tell Minho I'll bring him back some samples if I can. Minho Choi was his best friend, a fellow scientist who had helped him train for 6 months. Minho had made him run through simulations, practice with primitive tools, and memorize everything known about Vergas 7's ecosystem. They had stayed up late many nights, talking about what this exam meant for humanity. If Taiho succeeded, Earth would gain respect among the galactic community. If he failed, humanity would remain the newcomers, the weak species that everyone ignored. The pod door sealed shut. Air hissed as the atmosphere adjusted. Then, with a violent lurch, the pod launched from the station. Taiho's stomach flipped as gravity disappeared. Through the small window, he watched the station shrink away. The planet grew larger, its purple and red surface filling his vision. The descent was rough. The pod shook and rattled as it hit the atmosphere. Heat washed over the exterior, turning the window orange with friction. Taiho gripped the harness straps and tried to breathe steadily. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. When you're scared, slow down, look around, the land will tell you what you need to know. With a tremendous crash, the pod hit ground. The harness dug into Taiho's chest. The door blew open with explosive bolts, and purple-tinted air rushed in. His mask immediately activated, filtering the toxic atmosphere. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth's, making his body feel sluggish. Taiho stepped out of the pod onto alien soil. The western continent stretched before him. Dark purple trees with black bark surrounded him. The forest was dense and humid. Strange sounds echoed through the undergrowth, clicks, whistles, and low rumbles that made his hair stand up. He pulled out his survival knife and looked around carefully. The first rule of survival: assess your situation. He needed water, shelter, and a defensible position before nightfall. The datapad said Vergas 7's day cycle was only 18 hours. He had maybe 6 hours of daylight left. That's when he noticed them. Small creatures, about the size of rats, watching him from the bushes. They had gray fur and large black eyes, 6 legs each, long tails that twitched nervously. The datapad identified them as skitters, classified as non-sapient scavengers. Low intelligence. No threat to humans. Taiho counted at least 20 of them, all staring at him. He found it oddly comforting. At least he wasn't completely alone on this nightmare planet. He smiled at them, knowing they couldn't understand. "Well," he said out loud, his voice muffled by the mask, "let's see if a human can surprise everyone." He picked up his pack and walked into the forest. Behind him, the skitters followed at a cautious distance, their black eyes never leaving the strange, two-legged creature who had fallen from the sky. 3 days into the exam, Taiho had established a routine. Each morning, he woke before the planet's dim red sun rose above the horizon. He checked his shelter, a lean-to structure he'd built against a large rock formation. The shelter wasn't fancy, but it kept the acid rain off him and reflected heat from his small fire. Fire. That had been the turning point. On his first night, shivering in the cold, Taiho had spent 2 hours working with friction to create flames. He used dried wood from a dead tree and a technique his grandfather taught him, bow drill method, spinning a stick against a flat piece of bark until the friction created an ember. It was exhausting work. His hands cramped and blistered, but eventually smoke appeared, then a tiny red glow, then blessed fire. Up in orbit, Yuna watched the thermal scanners in amazement. "He made fire," she told the other Earth observers. "Without tools, just wood and patience." The Galactic Council observers also took notice, but they seemed confused rather than impressed. Most advanced species had forgotten such primitive techniques thousands of years ago. Why would anyone waste energy on manual fire starting when plasma torches existed? But Taeho didn't have a plasma torch. He had his hands, his mind, and his memories of childhood lessons in the Korean mountains. The skitters had grown bolder. What started as 20 watching from a distance had become nearly 100. They formed a loose ring around his camp, chittering softly to each other. Taeho found their presence comforting. He talked to them while he worked, explaining what he was doing even though they couldn't understand. "See, you want to find fungi that the local animals eat," he said, pointing at some purple mushroom-like growths. "If they eat it and don't die, it's probably safe for me too. Watch." He had spent hours observing the skitters' behavior. They ate certain plants and avoided others. They drank from specific parts of the stream. They stayed away from particular areas of the forest. By watching them, Taeho learned what was dangerous and what was safe. On the third day, he noticed something strange. A few skitters were gathering small sticks and placing them near his fire pit. Not inside the fire, just nearby, arranging them in small piles. It seemed random, but it made him smile anyway. Maybe they were curious about the fire. While Taeho adapted to his new environment, the other contestants struggled badly. The Ralkari warriors, so confident at the start, faced disaster on day 3. Their squad of 6 had been hunting a large herbivore for food when they encountered one of Vergos 7's apex predators. The creature was called a tri-serpent in the Council database. 20 feet long with 3 heads, each capable of spitting acid that could melt through their chitinous armor. The Ralkari warriors were trained fighters, disciplined and brave, but they were used to fighting enemies they could predict. The tri-serpent was chaos incarnated. It attacked from 3 angles at once, adapted to every strategy they tried, and showed no fear of their weapons. 2 Ralkari warriors were critically injured. Their armor melted away. Emergency beacons activated automatically when their vitals dropped to dangerous levels. The Council extracted them immediately. The remaining 4 Ralkari fell back to a defensive position, their confidence shattered. Kuzest, their leader, sat against a rock and stared at his wounded hands. "How did we fail?" he clicked in disbelief. "We are warriors. We train our whole lives for this." The problem was that training made them rigid. They knew how to fight soldiers, how to execute battle plans, how to follow orders, but Vergos 7 didn't follow orders. It was wild, unpredictable, constantly changing. Their strength became their weakness. The Quelon intellectuals faced different problems. On day 5, a massive electromagnetic storm rolled across their continent. Lightning struck constantly, creating magnetic fields that scrambled their equipment. Their advanced sensors failed, their communication devices went silent, their environmental suits stopped regulating temperature correctly. Bellowing Tide and his companions retreated into a cave system, hoping to wait out the storm. But the storm lasted 2 full days. Their supplies began to run low. Worse, their biology required specific nutrients that they hadn't found on Vergos 7. They were slowly starving, their brilliant minds unable to solve the simple problem of finding food their bodies could process. "We should have studied more primitive survival methods," one Quelon admitted weakly. "All our technology is useless here." Across the planet, similar stories played out. A crystalline species shattered when the temperature dropped suddenly at night. A methane-breathing species couldn't find suitable atmosphere pockets. A species that relied on hive-mind communication fell apart when the distance between members grew too large. By day 5, 47 contestants had become 41. 6 species had failed completely. Taeho, meanwhile, thrived. He had found a stream with clean water. His purifier worked, but he also learned which rocks filtered the water naturally by watching where the skitters drank. He built fish traps using woven reeds, catching small aquatic creatures that tasted like sour chicken. He created spears with sharpened wood and stone tips, using them to hunt larger prey from a safe distance. During Yuna's daily communication window, she could barely contain her excitement. "Tai-ho, you're doing better than 80% of the contestants. The council is impressed. Well, confused and impressed. They keep asking how you learned these techniques." Tae-ho smiled through his mask. "My grandfather. He believed that technology makes us forget important things. He taught me that humans survived for thousands of years with just our hands and our minds. Turns out he was right." But Yuna had noticed something else. Something that worried and fascinated her in equal measure. "Tai-ho, we need to talk about the skitters. There are now over 300 around your camp. That's unusual. But more than that, our sensors are showing strange readings. Their brain activity has increased, not by a little, by 34% in just 5 days. Tai-ho looked around at his small companions. They were everywhere now, watching everything he did. When he built his fish trap, dozens of them sat in a circle, their black eyes following his hands. When he started his fire each evening, they gathered close, feeling the warmth. "Are they dangerous?" he asked. "No," Yuna said slowly. "But Minho has been analyzing the data. He thinks something unprecedented is happening. The skitters are learning from you, Tai-ho. Not just learning, they're changing." Tae-ho didn't fully understand what that meant. He was too busy surviving to worry about it much. But he had noticed the skitters acting strangely. They no longer just gathered sticks randomly. They placed them in organized piles, sorted by size. When he demonstrated how to crack open the hard-shelled nuts that grew on certain trees, he later found nuts that had been cracked open the same way, left near his shelter. One evening, as he sat by his fire eating roasted fish, one of the larger skitters approached. It had been around since the first day, bolder than the others. Tai-ho had started calling it Clever in his mind, though he felt silly naming an animal. Clever sat on its hind legs and made a soft chirping sound. Then it picked up a stick with its front paws, manipulating it clumsily. The stick fell. Clever tried again and again. "You trying to use tools?" Tai-ho asked softly. He picked up another stick and showed Clever how to grip it better. "Like this, see? Use the side of your paw." Clever watched intently. The next attempt was slightly better. The stick didn't fall immediately. Tai-ho laughed quietly. "Well, you're trying anyway. That's more than most people do." He didn't realize that up in orbit, every scientist monitoring the exam had stopped their other work to watch this moment. He didn't know that arguments were breaking out in the council chambers about what his presence on Vergas 7 might mean. All Tai-ho knew was that he wasn't alone anymore. He had friends, even if they were small, six-legged creatures who couldn't talk. In the isolation of the exam, that meant everything. Day 12 arrived with terrible news. Only 31 contestants remained alive. The survival exam had become a disaster, the worst performance in 300 years of Galactic Council history. Species that had seemed unstoppable at the start were now broken and desperate. The mighty Ralkari warriors huddled in defensive positions, barely moving. The brilliant Quelon intellectuals rationed their last supplies, too weak to explore for food. A flying species had lost members to the violent windstorms. An armored species had been trapped in quicksand-like mud. The council observers debated stopping the exam early. This level of failure was unprecedented and embarrassing, but the rules were clear. The exam continued for 30 days unless every contestant was dead or evacuated. Tai-ho remained unaware of the broader situation. He had no way to communicate with other contestants, and Yuna only gave him brief updates during their daily 5-minute windows. She told him he was doing well. She didn't tell him that he was now in the top 5 performers across the entire planet, or that betting markets in the galactic media had shifted dramatically. Humans, once considered the weakest species, were suddenly fascinating. His camp had evolved into something more than just a shelter. He had built a smokehouse to preserve meat. He had created a small garden plot where he planted seeds from edible plants, hoping they would grow before the exam ended. He had dug a proper latrine away from his water source. He had even built a primitive calendar, marking each day with notches on a stick. But the most remarkable change was the skitters. Their population around his camp had exploded to over 500. They had organized themselves into groups, each group seeming to have a different purpose. Some groups gathered food. Others collected water in small leaf containers. Some appeared to be watching for predators, sitting in high positions and making warning chirps when danger approached. Taiho had started teaching them without realizing it. When he showed them how to crack nuts, entire groups practiced the technique. When he demonstrated weaving reeds together to make cordage, skitters attempted to copy him, their small paws fumbling but persistent. When he shared his food with them, establishing a pattern of bringing offerings to a central spot where everyone could access them, they adopted the same behavior among themselves. Most remarkably, they were beginning to communicate, not with words, but with specific sounds. A sharp chirp meant danger. A soft trill meant food was nearby. A rising whistle seemed to mean, "Come here." Taiho noticed these patterns and started responding to them, reinforcing the sounds by reacting appropriately. In orbit, Minho analyzed the data with growing excitement and concern. "Director Park, you need to see this," he told Yuna, pulling up brain scans of the skitters. "Their neural pathways are restructuring. This isn't just behavioral learning. This is biological evolution happening in real time." Yuna stared at the scans in disbelief. "That's impossible. Evolution takes thousands of generations." "Not on Vergos 7, Minho explained, pointing to environmental data. "The planet has extreme radiation levels that cause rapid mutation. Most species die from it. But the skitters have something unique: extreme genetic plasticity. They can incorporate beneficial mutations within their own lifetime. It's a survival trait for dealing with the planet's harsh conditions, but it's never been triggered by exposure to intelligence before." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Taiho's presence, his constant demonstration of tool use, language, social cooperation, and abstract thinking, combined with the radiation exposure, is triggering accelerated evolution. The skitters aren't just learning from him, they're adapting to become more like him, more intelligent, more capable, more sapient." Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. "Does the Council know?" "Not yet, but they will soon. This is unprecedented. There are laws against uplifting pre-sapient species. Strict laws. What Taiho is doing, even accidentally, could disqualify Earth from the exam. Or worse. On Vergos 7, Taiho had no idea about any of this. His biggest concern on day 12 was the weather. Dark clouds had been building on the horizon for 2 days. His datapad warned of an approaching superstorm, a Category 5 electromagnetic hurricane that would make the previous storms look like gentle rain. He needed to prepare. His lean-to shelter wouldn't survive strong winds. He needed something stronger, more protected. He spent the entire day working on a better shelter, using a cave he had found nearby. He reinforced the entrance with rocks and woven branches. He stored water, food, and firewood deep inside. He created drainage channels to prevent flooding. The skitters watched everything, and they helped. Not much at first, just bringing him sticks or moving small rocks. But they were helping, coordinating their efforts in ways that seemed impossible for creatures of their intelligence level. Clever, the large skitter he'd befriended early on, had become something like a leader among them. Other skitters looked to Clever for guidance. When Clever chirped in a certain way, groups would move to do specific tasks. It reminded Tai-ho of how his grandfather would organize villagers for community projects. "You're getting smart," Tai-ho told Clever, scratching the creature gently between its ears. "Too smart for your own good, maybe." Clever made a sound that was almost like purring and leaned into the touch. On day 13, the council issued evacuation orders. The superstorm was larger than predicted. It would cover half the planet with sustained winds over 200 miles per hour and electromagnetic pulses that could fry equipment. All contestants needed to activate their emergency beacons immediately. Across Vergos 7, exhausted and terrified contestants pressed their beacons with relief. The Ralkari warriors were extracted, humiliated, but alive. The Quelon intellectuals were pulled from their cave, weak and starving. Species after species vanished in beams of light as the Council's teleportation system pulled them to safety. Tai-ho pressed his beacon. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. The device's small screen showed an error message. "Electromagnetic interference detected. Signal cannot penetrate local field. Move to higher ground or wait for interference to clear." But there was no higher ground. The storm was already here. Purple lightning forked across the sky. Wind began to howl. Rain started to fall, each drop sizzling with acid. Yuna's voice came through his communicator, frantic and broken by static. "Tai-ho, your beacon isn't working. The storm is interfering with the extraction signal. You need to—" The signal died completely. He was alone. No, not alone. 500 skitters surrounded him, all looking frightened as the storm approached. They chirped and whistled nervously. Tai-ho made a decision. "Come on," he shouted, gesturing toward the cave. "Inside! All of you inside!" The skitters understood his tone, if not his words. They poured into the cave in a gray tide. Tai-ho followed them in and began sealing the entrance with the barriers he'd prepared. He worked frantically as the wind grew stronger. Rocks and branches wove together to create a windbreak. Not perfect, but it would have to be enough. The storm hit with the force of a bomb. Wind screamed across the landscape. Trees snapped like twigs. Lightning struck continuously, so bright it turned night into day. The electromagnetic pulses made Tai-ho's mask flicker and his datapad die completely. Inside the cave, Tai-ho and 500 skitters huddled together in the darkness. He could feel their small, warm bodies pressing against him, seeking comfort. He started his fire using the bow drill method, needing the light and warmth. The skitters gathered around the flames, mesmerized. "We're going to be okay," Tai-ho said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "We survived together." Outside, the superstorm raged, and in orbit, the entire galaxy watched the human who refused to give up, surrounded by creatures that were changing in ways that would reshape everything everyone thought they knew about evolution and intelligence. The storm lasted 5 days. 5 days of constant wind, lightning, and rain. 5 days of being trapped in the cave with hundreds of frightened creatures. 5 days that changed everything. Tai-ho had to manage survival for all of them. The skitters couldn't hunt or gather during the storm, so he shared his stored food. He rationed carefully, making sure everyone got something. He maintained the fire constantly, keeping it alive through careful tending. He organized the cave space, creating areas for sleeping, eating, and waste. He channeled water that leaked through cracks so it didn't flood the cave. The skitters watched everything. But more than that, they participated. When Tai-ho needed specific items, they fetched them. When the fire needed more wood, they brought pieces from the storage area. When water needed to be moved, they used their mouths to carry the leaf containers he'd made. But it went deeper than simple tasks. They began to understand abstract concepts. Tai-ho created a schedule, sleeping when the storm was loudest and working when it calmed slightly. The skitters adopted the same schedule. He established a fairness system for food distribution, making sure younger and smaller skitters got equal shares. The skitters began doing the same among themselves, waiting patiently for their turn. Most remarkably, their communication exploded in complexity. By day 3 of the storm, they had developed dozens of distinct sounds. Chirps with different pitches meant different things. Whistles of varying length conveyed information. They started combining sounds, creating basic sentences. Danger outside. Food here. Water need. Taiho found himself responding to their language naturally. When Clever made the sound for outside look, Taiho understood the skitter wanted him to check the storm's progress. When younger skitters made the sound for cold help, he moved them closer to the fire. On day 4 of the storm, something extraordinary happened. Taiho was working on creating a better water channel using rocks. Clever approached with 3 other large skitters. They watched for several minutes. Then, without any prompting, they began moving rocks themselves. Not randomly. They were copying Taiho's technique, placing rocks in deliberate positions to guide water flow. Taiho sat back, stunned. "You understand what I'm doing," he whispered. "You're not just copying actions. You understand the purpose." Clever made a complex series of sounds that almost seemed like agreement. In orbit, chaos reigned in the council chambers. The storm had prevented them from seeing what was happening in Taiho's cave, but the last readings before the electromagnetic interference hit had shown impossible data. The skitters' brain activity had increased by over 200%. Their brain structures were physically changing, growing new neural pathways at a rate that violated every known law of biology. The council was divided into 3 camps. The first wanted to terminate the exam immediately and quarantine Vergos 7. The second wanted to study what was happening. The third argued that Taiho had violated fundamental laws about interfering with pre-sapient species and should be arrested the moment the storm ended. Yuna fought for him in every meeting. "He didn't know this would happen. He was just trying to survive. How is teaching survival skills a crime?" A council elder, a crystalline being named Harmonious Frequency, spoke carefully. "The intent is irrelevant. The outcome is what matters. If the skitters have achieved sapience because of human interference, this is an uplifting event. Uplifting is illegal without council approval and centuries of study. The consequences could be severe." Minho had a different perspective. "Maybe we've been thinking about this wrong," he told Yuna privately. "Every species in the galaxy achieved sapience through natural evolution over millions of years. But what if there's another path? What if intelligence can be triggered by exposure to intelligence? What if teaching is a catalyst for evolution?" "That's a beautiful theory," Yuna said tiredly, "but it won't keep Taiho out of prison." On day 5, the storm finally broke. Taiho removed the barriers from the cave entrance and stepped outside. The landscape had transformed. Trees were gone, torn up by their roots. The ground was scoured clean in places, piled high with debris in others. The purple forest he'd learned to navigate was now an alien wasteland. But he and the skitters had survived. He breathed the filtered air through his mask and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had made it through the worst disaster the planet could throw at them. The skitters emerged from the cave cautiously. They stayed close together, using their new communication sounds to coordinate. Then they did something that made Taiho's heart stop. They began to organize a work party. One group started gathering scattered wood. Another searched for food. A third began clearing debris from around the cave entrance. They weren't waiting for Taiho to tell them what to do. They were thinking ahead, planning, working together with purpose and organization. "Oh no," Taiho whispered. "What have I done?" He activated his communicator, hoping it would work now that the storm had passed. Yuna's voice came through immediately, clear but strained. "Taiho! Thank the stars you're alive! Don't move! Stay where you are! The council is sending a special extraction team. This is complicated. Yuna, what's happening? Are the Skitters okay? There was a long pause. The Skitters are more than okay. Taiho, I need you to listen carefully. What you've accidentally done is create a new sapient species. The Council is calling it the most significant evolutionary event in recorded history, and they're very, very upset about it. Before Taiho could respond, Clever approached with something in its paws. It was a knife, made from volcanic glass, carefully shaped and sharpened. The craftsmanship was crude, but unmistakable. Clever had made a tool, not by copying, but by understanding the concept and creating its own version. Clever held out the knife to Taiho and made a new sound, one he'd never heard before. It was longer, more complex, almost musical. The translator in his mask flickered to life, trying to process it. The translation appeared on his cracked data pad screen. Gift, Sky Teacher, thank. Taiho took the knife with shaking hands. The Skitters had given him a name, Sky Teacher. They had language, they had tool-making, they had abstract thought, they had gratitude. I'm so sorry, he said to Clever, tears streaming down his face. I didn't mean to change you. I didn't know this would happen. Clever tilted its head, studying him with those large black eyes. Then it reached out with one paw and touched Taiho's hand gently. The gesture was so human, so full of understanding and forgiveness, that Taiho broke down completely. Around them, hundreds of Skitters gathered, watching their Sky Teacher cry. They didn't understand tears yet, but they understood emotion. They pressed close, offering comfort the only way they knew how, through touch and presence. Above them, an extraction beam began to power up. The council was coming. The exam was about to end, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. Far across Vergos 7, in their safe, extracted locations, the Ralkari warriors watched the live feed of Taiho and the Skitters. Kist sat in stunned silence. We thought strength meant armor and weapons. He clicked quietly. But the human's strength was something else entirely. Teaching, patience, compassion. He created an army not through conquest, but through kindness. In the Quelon observation area, Bellowing Tide watched with all his tentacles hanging limply in shock. We calculated wrong, he admitted to his companions. Intelligence isn't about technology or individual brilliance. It's about connection. The human connected with a primitive species and elevated them. We couldn't connect with anything. We were alone. And that was our failure. The galaxy was learning a lesson it had forgotten long ago. Power came in many forms, and sometimes the most profound strength was the ability to lift others up. Day 20 arrived with confusion and tension. Taiho sat in a temporary shelter near his original camp, surrounded by council officials, scientists, and armed security. The Skitters had been moved to a different area, separated from him for observation and study. He could hear them calling for him, making the sound that meant, Sky Teacher where? His heart broke a little more each time. Yuna had managed to get herself assigned as his legal representative. She sat beside him during the endless meetings. Her face tired but determined. Minho had come down from orbit as part of the scientific delegation, constantly arguing with other xenobiologists about what had happened. The Council's position was clear. Taiho had violated the Sapiens Protection Act by interfering with a pre-sapient species' natural development. The fact that it was accidental didn't matter. The law existed to prevent exactly this type of situation. But there was a problem. According to Council law, if a species achieved sapience, they had rights, and the Skitters had undeniably achieved sapience. They had language, tool use, abstract thinking, social organization, art, and most importantly, self-awareness. Tests confirmed they understood themselves as individuals and could plan for the future. This created an impossible situation. The council couldn't punish the Skitters for becoming intelligent, but they couldn't ignore that a contestant had fundamentally altered a planet's ecosystem and created a new sapient species during what was supposed to be a simple survival exam. On day 25, with 5 days left in the official exam period, Taiho was finally allowed to visit the Skitters. They were being held in a large enclosure, given food and water, but treated like laboratory animals. When Taiho approached, hundreds of them rushed to the fence, calling his name in their language. "Sky Teacher! Sky Teacher!" Clever pushed through the crowd and pressed against the barrier. The Skitter had grown slightly larger, its eyes more intelligent than before. It made a complex series of sounds. Taiho's translator processed them. "You leave us. We do wrong?" "No," Taiho said firmly, pressing his hand against the fence where Clever's paw touched from the other side. "You did nothing wrong. You're amazing. You're smart and kind, and you learned so fast. I'm proud of you. Why separate? Why cage?" Taiho struggled to explain. How do you tell a newly sapient species about bureaucracy and laws and politics? The leaders from other planets are scared. They don't understand what happened. They need time to think. We understand. They think we dangerous. The sadness in that statement hit Taiho hard. In just 25 days, these creatures had gone from simple scavengers to beings capable of understanding prejudice and fear. They had evolved not just biologically, but emotionally and socially. That night, Taiho made a decision. He requested a formal meeting with the full council. Yuna tried to stop him. "Taiho, you're already in trouble. Don't make it worse." "I can't make it worse," he replied. "Either they're going to punish me or they're not. But I need to speak for the Skitters. They can't speak for themselves yet. Their language is too new. They need someone to advocate for them." The council assembled on day 28. It was a grand chamber, filled with representatives from 200 species across the galaxy. Taiho stood at the center, feeling very small and very human. Yuna and Minho stood behind him for support. An ancient being, whose species was so old no one remembered their original name, spoke first. "Taiho Kim of Earth, you stand accused of illegal uplifting of a pre-sapient species. How do you plead?" "I don't plead anything," Taiho said calmly, "because I didn't commit a crime. I survived. That's what the exam asked me to do. Everything else was accidental." Murmurs filled the chamber. Another council member spoke, a floating, gaseous being whose voice resonated through the air. "Accidental or not, you have violated the natural order. These creatures would have taken millions of years to evolve intelligence if they ever did. You compressed that into weeks." "Did I?" Taiho challenged. "Or did I just trigger something that was already there? The Skitters have genetic plasticity as a survival trait. They were already capable of rapid adaptation. I just gave them something to adapt to, something to learn from. Is teaching a crime?" A Ralkari representative stood, and Taiho was surprised to see it was Kust, the warrior who had mocked him at the start. "I wish to speak," Kuzet clicked. "I have watched the humans' recordings. I have seen what he did. He did not force the Skitters to change. He simply lived as humans live. He made fire, built shelter, found food, created tools. He shared his knowledge freely. The Skitters chose to learn. They chose to change. Is their choice not their own?" More murmurs, these ones thoughtful. Bellowing Tide, the Quelon intellectual, also stood. "I have studied the data extensively. The Skitters' evolution was triggered by environmental factors unique to Vergos 7, combined with exposure to intelligent behavior. But there is something else. The humans showed them kindness. He treated them as equals, even when they were not. He shared food, provided protection, offered comfort. I believe this emotional connection was as important as the practical knowledge. The Skitters did not just learn how to survive. They learned why to survive. They learned about community, cooperation, and compassion. These are the foundations of civilization. The ancient being at the center spoke again. If we punish the human, what message does that send? That teaching is wrong? That kindness leads to punishment? That we fear new intelligence? We must also consider the Skitters themselves, another voice added. They are sapient now. We cannot change that. They have rights under council law. What do they want? That's when Yunji Nam, Earth's diplomat, stood. She was a tough woman in her 50s who had fought her way through galactic politics for years. The Skitters have expressed their wishes clearly. They want protection. They want time to develop as a species without interference, and they want their sky teacher to visit them regularly, not to rule them, not to guide them, just to visit, to talk, to remain friends. And what does Earth want? The ancient being asked. Earth wants justice, Yunji said firmly. Our representative did nothing wrong. He passed your exam. He survived better than almost every other species. He showed skills that you dismissed as primitive, but proved to be more valuable than all your advanced technology. And yes, something unexpected happened, but unexpected doesn't mean illegal. We request that Taiho Kim be declared the winner of this year's survival exam, and we request that Vergas 7 be declared a protected world, with the Skitters given provisional sapient status and a 100-year observation period to develop naturally. The chamber erupted in debate. Arguments flew back and forth. Some species demanded punishment. Others defended Taiho. The Ralkari warriors surprisingly became some of his strongest supporters. The human defeated us not with weapons, but with wisdom, Xit declared. He deserves honor, not imprisonment. The debate lasted for hours. Finally, the ancient being called for silence. We have made a decision. Taiho Kim is cleared of all charges. The evidence shows no malicious intent, and the outcome, while unexpected, is not inherently harmful. He is declared the winner of this year's survival exam, the first human to pass. Congratulations. Relief washed through Taiho, but the ancient being wasn't finished. Furthermore, Vergas 7 is declared a protected world. The Skitters, now to be called the Vergasian people, are granted provisional sapient status. They will be monitored but not interfered with for 100 years. After that period, if they maintain their development, they will be granted full council membership. And my request to visit them? Taiho asked quietly. Granted. Once per year, you may visit Vergas 7 for up to 1 month. You may not bring technology beyond basic supplies. You may not interfere with their development beyond simple conversation. You are essentially to be their friend, not their teacher, not their leader, their friend. Can you do that? Taiho thought about Clever, waiting in the enclosure, about the hundreds of Skitters who had trusted him during the storm, about the knife made of volcanic glass that he carried in his pack. Yes, he said, I can do that. The council session ended. Earth was granted limited colonization rights. But more importantly, humanity had gained something far more valuable than territory. They had gained respect. On day 30, the exam officially concluded. Taiho returned to the Skitter enclosure one last time before leaving. The barriers were being removed, the creatures released back to their forest. Clever approached him, now able to walk upright on its hind legs when it wanted to. You go home? Clever asked in their developing language. Yes, but I'll come back, I promise. Once every year, I'll visit. We build home, make it good, show you when return. Taiho knelt down so he was at eye level with Clever. You don't need to impress me, just be happy. Be safe, live well. Clever reached out and touched Taiho's face gently with one paw. Sky Teacher is friend. Yes, friend. Always. The extraction beam took Taiho up to the orbital station. He watched through the windows as Vergos 7 shrank below him, that purple and red nightmare planet that had changed everything. Yuna and Minho met him at the dock, hugging him tightly. "You did it," Yuna said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Taiho corrected. "All of us. Earth, humanity. We showed them what we are." 50 years passed. Taiho kept his promise, returning to Vergos 7 every year. He watched the Skitters, the Vergosian people, develop and grow. They built villages, then towns, then cities. They developed writing, mathematics, art, music, and philosophy. They never forgot their Sky Teacher, and every settlement had a monument to the human who accidentally taught them to reach for the stars. Now, 78 years old, Taiho walked slowly through a Vergosian city with his daughter Hana, who had become a famous xenoanthropologist. The buildings were beautiful, constructed with a unique blend of natural materials and clever engineering. Vergosians walked past them, some stopping to bow respectfully to the Sky Teacher. In the city center stood a massive statue. It showed a human figure surrounded by skitters, hands extended, sharing fire. The inscription read in both languages, "The Sky Teacher who showed us the stars." An elderly Vergosian approached, moving slowly on 6 legs, now stiff with age. It was Clever, now the Grand Elder of the Vergosian Council. "Friend Taiho, you return again." "I always return, Clever. Until I can't anymore. We know. We grateful. You give us greatest gift." "What gift? I didn't mean to change you." Clever made a sound that was very close to a human laugh, a sound the Vergosians had learned from recordings of Taiho. "You give us choice. Before you, we just exist. After you, we choose how to live. That is gift. That is freedom." Taiho looked around at the thriving city, at the Vergosians going about their lives with purpose and joy. He thought about that first day, standing in the purple forest, lonely and scared. He thought about the small creatures who watched him from the bushes. He thought about everything that came after. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for teaching me too." "What we teach you?" "That survival isn't just about living. It's about who you live with, and who you lift up along the way. That's the most human thing of all.